My daughter-in-law isn't as clean as you think, Marjorie, and I've got something here that'll keep you awake for the rest of your life. Arthur, the white dry cleaner owner, who always looked at me with that same condescending glare, tossed a plastic bag onto the counter. His eyes sliced through me like he wanted to peel my skin off. I thought he was just gearing up for another one of his cheap, racist jabs he loved to throw whenever I stepped inside. But seconds later, my legs froze. Inside the bag was a bank slip for $4.8 million and a photo of my 2 grandchildren, each face circled in red, marked with a symbol only monsters would ever use. Arthur whispered, trembling, as if confessing a sin. I hate dark-skinned women, but I hate traffickers even more. Your daughter-in-law, she ain't who you think she is. In a single moment, my world flipped upside down. So who the hell is Chloe? Why is there 4? $8 million involved. Why were my grandbabies circled in red? If it were you, would you stay silent or tear into the truth, even if it destroys your whole family? If you want to know what Marjorie found in Chloe's coat, hit follow and comment. Continue to see the next part. My name is Marjorie Bennett, a dark-skinned African-American woman, 52 years old. I've lived through enough pain to fill several lifetimes, but the only thing that keeps me going is Derek and my 2 grandchildren, Sophia and Leo. After my husband died, I swore I'd stay strong so the kids would always have someone to lean on. My days revolved around dropping them off, cooking, comforting them when they cried, and listening to their little stories from school. I thought my life would stay that way, quiet and predictable, until the afternoon I walked into the dry cleaner to pick up my daughter-in-law, Chloe's coat. No one knew that within minutes my entire world would be torn apart. When I placed the ticket on the counter, Arthur looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him. He was usually grumpy, muttering something every time I came in late, but today his lips were pale and his hands shook as if there was no blood left in them. He glanced around the shop, then suddenly grabbed my wrist. I didn't have time to react before he pulled me into the back room. The cramped space smelled of chemicals and dim yellow lights buzzed overhead, but the most frightening thing in that room was the look in Arthur's eyes. He was breathing hard, his voice caught as if he was choking on a truth too heavy to swallow. Marjorie, take the kids and leave town before sunrise. I didn't understand. My chest tightened. I asked him question after question, but Arthur raised his hand as if every word from me was pointless compared to what he was about to show me. He opened a drawer by the wall, pulled out a clear plastic bag, and placed it in my hands. My heart constricted the moment I looked inside. It was a bank transfer slip, the number so large it blurred my vision. $4,800,000. The recipient was a string of coded characters. No address, no identity, nothing except a bank sequence. I hadn't even processed it when Arthur told me to look at the second item, a photo. Sophia and Leo, my babies, the little faces I kissed every night before tucking them in. But this time, each face was circled in red marker. The lines were crooked, violent, like whoever drew them wanted to leave a stain no one could erase. I stepped back, my shoulder hitting the cold wall. My mouth felt like sand. Arthur's eyes were heavy with fear, as if he'd been torturing himself long before he decided to hand these things to me. Chloe, she's more dangerous than you think, he said, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. My daughter-in-law's name felt like a blade. Chloe, who always smiled softly, apologized for every spilled cup, said, "Mom, let me help every holiday." That Chloe? I wanted to deny it, to scream that he was lying, but my throat locked shut. I looked at the photo again, at those red circles that felt like blood smeared right across their little faces. Arthur didn't blink. If you want to see those kids safe, leave. I could barely feel my legs as I walked out of the shop. The air outside was suddenly cold and sharp. I clutched the plastic bag against my chest, shaking from fear, doubt, and a terror I wasn't ready to name. I lifted my head just in time to see a black SUV glide slowly down the street. The windows were tinted, but the driver turned his head and stared straight at me. That stare wasn't from a stranger. It was the stare of someone waiting for me to panic, and he lingered a moment too long. I almost ran all the way home, still feeling the stare from the man in the black SUV burning into the back of my neck. As soon as the door closed, I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. My hand still clutched the evidence bag, and fear coiled tightly in my chest. The image of those red circles around my grandchildren's faces flashed again and again, like someone whispering that my time was running out. I rushed into the bedroom, yanked out a suitcase, and stuffed clothes inside without caring what belonged to whom. A single sock mixed with Sophia's shirts, toys tangled with Leo's jacket, but I kept packing as fast as my shaking hands allowed. Sophia appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with worry. She was always perceptive, always sensing when something shifted in my voice. I knelt, pulled both children close, and spoke quietly but firmly. "You're going with Grandma right now." "Don't ask anything." I saw Leo's lip tremble and his eyes shine with tears, while Sophia gripped my wrist, nodding slightly as if she understood this was not the moment for questions. I grabbed some snacks, water bottles, and shoved them into a small bag. Then I rushed downstairs, heart pounding hard enough that it felt like it echoed through the whole house. I glanced out the window before opening the door, terrified that the SUV was idling in the driveway. The children stayed close to me, Leo clutching his plastic dinosaur like it was the only safe thing he had left. Just as I locked the door, my phone vibrated. A message lit up the screen. Chloe's name. "Mom, where are you? Answer me." Not a single word about the kids, not one hint of concern for their safety, just an order, cold and abrupt. In that moment, I finally accepted that the woman I once believed to be gentle and well-meaning was hiding something far darker than what Arthur had shown me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, lifted Leo into my arms, and led Sophia toward the taxi Grace had arranged. On the main road, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Every intersection, every turn felt like a trap waiting to close on us. Then, just as the taxi merged onto the highway, bright headlights filled the mirror. The glare was sharp and deliberate. My stomach dropped when I recognized the black SUV following at the same steady distance, never too close, never too far, as if it wanted me to know I was being watched. I leaned forward to shield Leo, and Sophia grabbed my hand, her small palm ice cold. "Grandma, is that car following us?" she whispered so softly that even the hum of the taxi almost drowned her out. I stroked her head and tried to lie with a steady voice, probably going the same way. But she and I both knew it wasn't true. At the bus station, the crowd became my only advantage. Noise, chaos, people shouting instructions at each other, dragging luggage across the pavement. I hurried the kids out of the taxi, weaving through clusters of travelers, trying to disappear among them. My pulse hammered in my ears. Just when I thought we'd gained a little distance, I heard a car door slam. I turned. The black SUV was parked at the curb. The back door opened and a man stepped out. He scanned the crowd once, then his eyes landed directly on Leo. He didn't smile, didn't rush. He simply stared. Stared with the calm of someone assessing merchandise. My grip on Sophia tightened until she flinched. In a single breath, I understood. I stood at a crossroads where my grandchildren's lives hung by a thread. The man from the SUV began walking toward us. I ran into St. Francis Church with the two kids clinging to me, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The faint light from the stained glass windows made me feel even more like someone being hunted. When I stepped inside, Father Michael was standing near the altar. The moment he saw me, he put his book down and hurried forward, his hands resting on my shoulders. "Marjorie, who terrified you like this?" he asked, his voice steady and warm. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. "Arthur, the evidence bag, the black SUV, the man staring at Leo at the bus station, everything spun in my head like a whirlpool." Father Michael looked at the children gripping my coat and guided us to a small room behind the sanctuary. When the door closed, a thin layer of safety settled in, but fear stayed in my chest. I set the suitcase down, pulled out the evidence bag, and placed it on the table. My hands shook as I did. Father Michael opened the bag, looked inside, and only a second later his face shifted. "Where did you get this?" he asked in a low voice. I told him everything, stumbling over words, my breaths short and uneven. When I described the man staring at Leo, my voice trembled so hard it split. Father Michael leaned back, pressed his hand to his forehead, and when he finally looked up again, he said something that made my knees feel weak. "These red circles are not harmless. They're marking codes used by child trafficking rings." My stomach hollowed. He turned the photo, pointing at the symbols printed along the edge. "This means selected. They want the children." I tightened my arms around Sophia while Leo pressed against my leg. The thought of someone choosing them like merchandise made cold sweat run down my spine. I whispered, "Who would do this?" Father Michael sighed and lifted the transfer receipt. "This amount is enormous. It's not personal. It's organized crime." The door opened and Attorney Victoria stepped inside. Father Michael must have called her the moment he heard my story. Victoria didn't waste time. She sat, pulled on gloves, and examined the documents like someone used to seeing the ugliest truths of the world. After a few minutes, she pointed at the transaction code. "This $4.8 million is laundered money passed through a shell company. Marjorie, this leads straight to an international criminal network." I stood up so quickly my chair shifted. "You think Chloe is involved?" Victoria looked at me long enough for silence to become the answer. "Nobody hides money like this unless they're deep inside something dirty." I shook my head. Memories of Chloe flashed by. Her shy smile when she first joined the family, her weak grip in the hospital after giving birth to Leo, the way she always asked me to watch the kids so she could go to meetings. I tried to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding, but the red circles on the photo kept burning in my mind. If it was a misunderstanding, why mark Sophia and Leo Victoria? Tapped the table, her expression sharpening. If someone is tailing you, this goes beyond what you imagine. She slid the evidence bag back toward me, stood, and leaned in. "You haven't seen the worst part." Her words crawled under my skin. I glanced at Father Michael for reassurance, but even he exhaled heavily as if preparing for something darker. Victoria stepped out to make a call. The room fell silent. I held the children close, feeling the weight of the air pressing down. Sophia leaned against my shoulder, and Leo hid his face against me, his small fingers gripping my shirt. I stroked their hair, but inside fear twisted into something sharp. Then Victoria returned, her expression completely changed. I straightened, my pulse racing. "Marjorie," she said quietly, "I'm afraid the people behind this aren't just after the kids." She placed her phone on the table, the call log still glowing on the screen. "They know you're here." My body locked. The room felt smaller. Somewhere in the distance, the heavy church door creaked like a warning. I returned to my house on a gray, heavy afternoon, carrying the feeling that an invisible rope was tightening around my neck. The front door opened with a long creak that sent a chill straight down my spine. The familiar smell of the hallway suddenly felt strange, as if someone else had been here and left their shadow behind. I stood on the doorstep, gripping the key so tightly my palms stung. As I stepped inside, I felt as though someone was right behind me, watching every movement, waiting to see what I would do next. I walked quietly toward Derek and Chloe's bedroom. Every step felt like stepping on thin glass. A lipstick-stained cup sat forgotten on the dresser. The blanket on the bed was slightly pulled back. I paused, listening for anything out of place. There was no voice, yet the silence hung so thick it made my skin prickle. I knelt down, pulled the safe from beneath the dresser, and wiped the sweat from my palms. The passcode Chloe once blurted out at a family gathering now felt like a loaded weapon in my hands. I turned the dial slowly. Each click in the metal felt like a hammer hitting my chest. When the safe finally unlatched, I inhaled deeply but still felt no air. Inside were papers stacked too neatly, too carefully. I reached for them, my fingers trembling so hard, the edge of the documents grazed my skin like a blade. The first passport carried Chloe's name and a photo of her smiling softly. But the second and third made my knees weaken. Sophia and Leo, each with a fake passport. Their tiny, innocent faces printed beside the last name Morales, as though they had never belonged to my son. My heart tightened until I thought it might burst. I dug deeper and saw boarding passes, 3 business class seats from Chicago to Madrid. Passengers Chloe Bennett, Sophia Morales, Leo Morales. I searched for Derek's name even though my mind already knew the truth. It wasn't there. A cold emptiness spread through my body, heavier than grief itself. I steadied myself against the dresser before I collapsed. From the bottom of the safe, I pulled out a thick brown envelope. A photograph slipped out and landed by my foot. When I picked it up, the air in my lungs froze. Chloe was kissing Julian Cortez, her arms around his neck, his hand gripping her waist, his eyes staring confidently into the camera, like a man untouchable. Behind the photo were printed messages, full of coded phrases and transaction notes identical to the one Arthur had shown me. Everything screamed one truth. Chloe planned to take the children to Madrid, hand them over to Cortez, and exchange them for money and freedom. My fingers tightened around the photo until it bent. All the moments I believed she loved the children now felt like scenes from a script she performed to perfection. Every smile, every soft word, lies. I gathered the documents and shoved them into my bag. I needed to get out before the house collapsed on top of me. But as soon as I stepped off the rug, the hardwood floor beneath my feet trembled slightly, as if pressed from below. I froze, listening. A footstep echoed from the first floor. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Each step vibrated through the walls like a warning drumbeat. Someone else was inside the house. I left my house through the back door, walking fast enough to be running, yet forcing my breath to stay steady so I wouldn't draw attention. When I finally sat in the back of Victoria's car, I allowed myself a few seconds to breathe. She handed me a burner phone the investigation team had retrieved from Chloe's belongings. The screen lit up with 2 short messages, each word carving into my chest like a blade. 2 targets confirmed. The second came right under it, ensure delivery. I read them again, feeling cold crawl down my spine. 2 targets, and there was no doubt who they were. Victoria watched me, her eyes sharp with the experience of someone who had seen the darkest parts of human nature. "These aren't casual messages," she said, scrolling through the almost empty log. "They came from an anonymous account using a security code tied to a trafficking network operating from Mexico to Florida." I clenched my hand until my nails bit into my skin. Everything I found in the safe now bled seamlessly into these messages, painting a truth I could no longer deny. We arrived at the temporary federal office. In the bright fluorescent light, the tension thickened. Agent Hayes spread a stack of files across the table. The edges were worn, showing they had passed through many hands. "Marjorie, the truth about Chloe is harsher than you think." Her voice was steady, but when she opened the first page, that steadiness turned cold. A photo stared back at me, a young woman with sharp, calculating eyes, the same face, but not the same person. Real name Chloe Ramirez Hayes said. She was connected to a child abduction case in Texas 2014. I froze. On the second page, another document appeared. Aliases, addresses, sightings. "She has lived under 3 false identities for 8 years, Victoria added. Ramirez, Carter, and Bennett, all tied to underground operations. Memories slammed into me. Chloe disappearing for long stretches, her detached attitude toward the kids, the inexplicable money, her unnatural calm during crises. Every detail lit up like a string of electric bulbs. I realized the woman I welcomed into my home was someone I never truly knew." Victoria leaned toward me. "Marjorie, Chloe was not a victim. She was a functioning link in a criminal chain." Hayes stepped in, her tone hardening. "And this chain has someone stationed near you." I gripped the table. "What do you mean?" Hayes slid a photo forward. Grainy camera footage, but unmistakable. The black SUV, the man who stepped out at the bus station. Worse, he had been captured lingering in my neighborhood for weeks. We believe he's a handler. His job is to monitor families involved with Chloe. My throat tightened. How long had my family been watched? How many nights had my grandchildren slept under the gaze of a trafficker? I kept from shaking by digging my nails into my palm. Victoria placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "He hasn't lost your trail. You've already been on their radar." Her words sliced into me. I reached for my phone. The moment it turned on, a notification appeared. Not a message, but a system alert. "Location sharing on." My heart lurched. I tapped it and a map opened. A blinking red dot showed my exact location. At the bottom of the screen was the line that made my breath stop. "Accessed by Chloe." She was tracking me right now. I sat inside the temporary command room with the federal agents, the white lights reflecting off tense faces. A large map marked the surveillance points across the town. Victoria stood beside me with her arms crossed, while Agent Hayes dropped a stack of files on the table with a sharp thud. "We need to corner the beast," she said, her tone steady in a chilling way. "She has to react. She has to expose her partners." Hearing Chloe being called a beast tightened something inside my chest. The woman I once welcomed as a daughter-in-law was now the center of a criminal operation. The agents drafted a false report, spreading it through the local police system that Sophia and Leo had disappeared from their safe house. Once the alert was sent, the big screen in the room lit up with incoming messages from Chloe's phone. The first one came within seconds. "Bring them back." The second followed harsher, as if typed with clenched fists. "Don't ruin my plan." I read each word, feeling as though frozen air had entered my lungs. The despair in her messages wasn't the despair of a mother. It was the fear of a deal collapsing. Victoria leaned closer to the screen and said quietly, "You see, this isn't someone losing her children. This is someone losing her merchandise." Another message arrived. "If they're gone, I'm dead." The truth behind that sentence was darker than anything I had imagined. Chloe wasn't being manipulated. She was bound to something much worse. Agent Hayes signaled the team. She's about to call Cortez. Once she does, we'll have everything. The phone rang. The caller ID showed no name, just the coded number Victoria had been tracking. She hit record. I gripped the arm of my chair so hard, the joints in my fingers turned white. Chloe's voice came through the speaker sharp and breathless. Without them, the deal collapses. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. The woman who once stood in my kitchen, who once held Leo after he fell, now spoke about the children as bargaining chips. The pain cut deep, but I forced myself to listen. Cortez answered. His voice was low and cold. "Shut up." Just 2 words, but they carried a vicious certainty. "Come to the hotel. We deal with the old woman first." The old woman? I knew exactly who he meant. Victoria pushed her chair back and leaned toward the screen, her whole posture sharpened. She shut off the audio and turned to me. Her gaze sliced through every layer of fear I tried to hide. "Marjorie," she said slowly, "they're targeting you." My fingers dug into the table edge, numb from pressure. The room tightened around me, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat pounding painfully in my ears. On the digital map beside us, the red dot marking Chloe's phone began to move. I watched it glide across town streets, each shift a reminder that they were coming out of the shadows and coming closer. I sat inside the federal vehicle, the dark window reflecting my own face, pale and strained. The air in the car was tense, thick enough to weigh on my chest. No one spoke. Every gaze stayed locked on the tablet, streaming the live feed from the camera set up around the roadside hotel. My heart pounded wildly, each beat pushing up into my throat. I knew Chloe and Cortez were within view, but knowing was one thing, witnessing was another. Their shadows appeared near the hotel entrance, and my breath stalled. Chloe stepped out first, movements jittery and uncontrolled. Cortez followed, cold and deliberate. As they walked into the parking lot, Victoria leaned closer to the screen, her voice a quiet blade. "Get ready. This is where their masks come off." My fingers dug into the seat. The woman I once called my daughter-in-law was now a stranger drenched in darkness. Through the live audio, Cortez spoke first, his voice a low threat. "Without the goods, you're worthless." Heat surged into my face. My grandchildren reduced to goods. Chloe lowered her head, then lifted it with a twisted smirk I didn't recognize. "I raised them for this day." Those words carved through me clean and merciless. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed. Victoria's glance cut sideways, confirming everything I had feared. Chloe had never loved the children. She groomed them, held them, played the role of mother, all for this trade. Every memory became ash. Cortez scanned the lot carefully, confident no one was watching. He dragged a large suitcase from the trunk and set it down. "Without them, you're broken merchandise." Chloe clenched her fists, lips trembling, then cracked into a smile, twisted with triumph. "I've waited too long. Tonight, I'm finally free." Her hunger for escape felt like poison seeping under my skin. Agent Hayes lifted her hand in signal. Every red light on the control panel blinked alive. They were ready. On screen, Cortez flipped open the suitcase, expecting money or something worse. Chloe hovered beside him, jittery with greed. Victoria's voice dropped sharp enough to split the room. "Now." In an instant, armored silhouettes rushed in from all directions. Shouts burst across the audio. "Federal agents, hands, where we can see them." Cortez lunged back, but he was taken down in seconds. Chloe shrieked, bolting to run, but a federal officer pinned her arms before she moved 2 feet. The scene unfolded so fast my eyes struggled to keep up. When the recording replayed, I heard her scream with horrifying clarity, "They're merchandise. I'm selling them for my new life." That sentence echoed through my bones long after her voice died out. Outside, red and blue lights washed over her body as she thrashed and fought, face contorted by pure rage. Cortez lay on the ground, restrained, his eyes colder than before. Agent Hayes opened the suitcase. Not money, but files, plastic-sealed profiles of children, entire inventory lists, ages, heights, transaction codes. My stomach twisted as she flipped to the 5th folder. My name appeared clearly at the top, Marjorie Bennett. The air vanished from my lungs. My fingers went numb. Victoria reached out to steady me, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. The truth was loud enough. A federal agent shined a flashlight beneath my name, revealing a final note highlighted in bold. The morning of the trial, the sky hung low and heavy, as if it too understood that this day would end an era soaked in blood and grief. I walked into the federal courthouse with my heart pulled tight. On the opposite side of the aisle, Chloe was escorted in. She looked nothing like the woman who once stood in my kitchen, smiling and calling me Mom. Her hair was tangled, her eyes were swollen red, her hands trembled inside the gleaming cuffs. Yet when she stepped through the courtroom doors, I could still see the faint shadow of arrogance clinging to her like a stain that refused to wash off. Cortez was brought in right behind her, his stare cold, as though no sentence on earth could touch him. But Chloe was different. She scanned the room, searching for Derek, for me, for anything she could cling to. When her eyes swept across the bench where I sat, I saw her eyelid twitch before she dropped her gaze. Her cuffed hands tightened as if trying to tear the metal apart with raw desperation. The trial opened in a silence so heavy it felt like a weight. The prosecutor rose and placed a thick stack of files on the stand. The overhead lights reflected off each cover, exposing the recordings that had made me sick to my core. When he projected the first evidence onto the large screen behind him, the courtroom seemed to darken in unison. The audio recording played first. Chloe's voice filled the room, sharp and dripping in greed. Their merchandise. Her words echoed through the chamber like a stone striking the bottom of a deep well. No one moved. Then the murmurs rose. A woman in the back row covered her mouth and burst into tears. A man shook his head with disgust. I felt my own hand clench until my nails dug into my palm. Next came the photograph of the 2 children marked with red circles and the recorded exchange between Chloe and Cortez. Her panicked voice cracking at the edges. If we don't have them, the deal collapses. Each sentence carved deeper into my chest. I had lived under the same roof with her, trusted her, let her hold my grandchildren, and she had spoken about them like stock to barter. When the evidence presentation ended, Chloe's attorney stood and tried to resurrect the image of a manipulated mother, a woman coerced by forces stronger than her. But every word he spoke fell flat beneath the crushing weight of the truth. Then Derek stood, my son with hollow cheeks from sleepless nights and eyes red with grief, but a stare sharp enough to cut glass. He stepped to the witness stand. The room fell into absolute silence. Derek drew a long breath, then looked directly at Chloe. From this moment on, you are no longer the mother of my children. His voice did not tremble. It rang like the final lock snapping shut. Chloe broke into tears, but her crying carried the desperate pitch of a predator robbed of her prey. Her lips moved, pleading for Derek to take it back, but he turned away without a flicker of hesitation. Finally, the verdict. The judge rose. His voice was firm, unyielding. Defendant Chloe Ramirez, based on the evidence presented and your incriminating statements in recorded conversations, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. The ruling fell like a slab of stone into silent water. Chloe collapsed where she stood, her legs giving way. She screamed, her voice cracking like shattered glass. "No, I was set up. Don't put me in there with them. Please, you have to listen." Two officers gripped her arms and lifted her. She kicked at the floor, face contorted, fighting as though the verdict itself were a physical blow. "I was forced. I didn't do anything." But no one in the room believed a single word from a woman who once called my grandchildren her ticket to a new life. The courtroom lights blared down on her, highlighting every warped detail of her despair. As the officers dragged her toward the exit, Chloe lifted her head and locked eyes with me. Her swollen gaze ignited with something venomous. Her lips curled into a trembling, hateful smile. "When I die," she whispered, "someone else will come for you." I froze where I stood, as if the ground had tilted beneath my feet. The murmurs around the room blurred into nothing. Only her voice lingered, echoing like a curse. Outside the courthouse, a white envelope waited at my feet, placed so neatly it could not have been dropped by accident. No one saw who left it. On the front were 3 words written in sharp, deliberate strokes. "We remember you." In the days after the trial, the small apartment in Charleston felt like an old quilt being stitched back together. Some parts were still frayed, some were worn thin, but at least it kept us warm. I brought Sophia and Leo here because Victoria insisted the old town was still crawling with unseen connections to the organization. Every night I lay awake to the sound of distant trains, the wind turning corners, and the soft breathing of 2 children trying to forget what they had lived through. Leo often came into my room at 3 in the morning, barefoot, eyes damp. He never said much. He simply climbed onto the bed and pressed his head against my chest. "Grandma, I heard footsteps," he whispered. I would stroke his back and feel his small body trembling each time the wind shifted outside. I held him until sunrise. Sophia kept her distance. She didn't cry, didn't speak much, but for an entire month she refused to step outside the door unless she was holding my hand. Her eyes darted to both sides of the street, searching for SUVs in the shadows. I took them to therapy, brought them to the tiny park near the church, showed them how to feel safe again in simple things, eating ice cream on the steps, blowing bubbles in the afternoon sun. But no matter how much I tried, Sophia sometimes looked at me with a silent question that never softened. "Will Mommy ever come back?" My heart sank every time. I answered with the gentlest words I could find. "You still have us, sweetheart. We still have each other." We both knew that wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only truth that didn't hurt her more. One afternoon while I was doing dishes, I heard Sophia call for me. Her voice was different, trembling but bright, holding a warmth I thought she had lost. I wiped my hands and walked into the living room. She sat at her little desk, hair tied loosely to one side, holding a marker. A new drawing lay in front of her, colors still wet. When I leaned in, I felt something inside me soften. A small house with a red roof, 4 people holding hands underneath, Sophia, Leo, Derek, and me. "Grandma, this is our family," she said. Her voice trembled, but the corners of her mouth curved into her first real smile in months. I placed my hand gently on her head. "It's beautiful," I whispered, feeling a part of my heart finally stitch itself back together. Hope flickered like a candle in a dark room, fragile but alive. But peace, whenever it found us, always carried a long shadow behind it. One morning when I opened the door to pick up the newspaper, there was a white envelope lying right on the threshold. No return address, no stamp, no markings. Just a plain envelope. But the moment I saw it, my intuition tightened like a knot. I brought it inside, took a breath, and opened it. Inside was a small slip of paper with letters printed in clean, cold type. "We know where you are." A chill ran through me. I looked around the apartment, then out the window, scanning the balconies, the sidewalk, the alley between buildings. No footsteps, no engines, nothing unusual. But the feeling of being watched pressed against my skin like a hand. I called Victoria immediately. When I read the message to her, she went silent for a moment. Then she said, "Lock your door, I'm on my way." While waiting for her, I stood at the window overlooking the street. The lamppost cast a warm yellow light over a thin veil of evening fog, touching the line of parked cars one by one. People walked sparsely bundled in jackets heading home. But then my eyes caught something at the far end of the street. A man stood beneath the lamplight, motionless, hands in the pockets of a long coat. His posture was sharp, the kind of posture meant for watching, not passing by. Something about the way he held himself echoed a memory of the SUV from months ago. I froze. He didn't move, didn't turn away, just stood there, staring up toward the apartment, as if he'd been waiting for me to look out the window. I stood frozen by the window, watching the figure beneath the street lamp tilt his head toward me. His face was hidden in the shadow, but I could feel the sick patience in the way he stood there motionless. Fear, the same fear that had strangled me night after night, crept up my spine. But this time, it didn't reach my chest. I held the open white envelope in my hand, the words, "We know where you are," staring back at me like a pulse. Instead of breaking me, something inside me hardened. I squeezed the letter and whispered into the room, "If you want to find me, I'll be right here." My voice came out steady, calmer than I expected. It surprised even me. The fear that once controlled my every breath vanished, replaced by something sharper. I set the envelope on the table and walked into the children's room. Sophia was asleep, with her face turned to the wall, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. Leo was tucked into his blanket, his little eyebrows pulling together as if he were dreaming something that frightened him. I stood in the doorway watching them, seeing every wound this nightmare had carved into their small hearts. I sat at the edge of Leo's bed, resting my hand over the blanket where his chest rose and fell. "No one touches Sophia or Leo ever again," I whispered. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't hope. It was a vow, a promise sealed with every breath I had left. Each word felt heavy, like stones falling in place, forming a foundation I would not break. When I stood, I no longer felt like the woman who once ran through the night, terrified and shaking. I had stepped through pain, betrayal, and the collapse of trust. I had become something different, something sharper. I was no longer running from the dark. I was walking into it, ready to drag the light in behind me. I pulled the door gently closed so I wouldn't wake the kids, and the small apartment fell into its usual hush, broken only by the faint hum of distant cars. I returned to the window. The man under the street lamp was still there, standing like a sentinel, like he was waiting for me to crack. But I wasn't the same woman he expected. I pushed open the window. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp pavement and winter. I braced my hands on the frame and stared directly at him. I remembered Chloe's voice in the courtroom, raw and venomous. "When I die, someone else will come for you." Those words had slipped beneath my skin like splinters. They were meant to scare me, to corner me, but instead they lit a fire in my chest. Chloe sold her own children for freedom. She traded their lives, their futures for a chance to escape the world she chose. That truth was enough for me to stop trembling altogether. If Chloe could sell her children and Cortez could put red circles around Sophia and Leo, and their organization could wait in the dark like wolves, then safety didn't exist unless I made it myself. I placed a hand over my heart, feeling it beat with a steady rhythm. Then I spoke clearly, each word slicing through the cold air. Chloe sold her own children for freedom, but I will burn down hell itself if anyone dares to touch my family. The words didn't just leave my lips, they carved themselves into the night. The figure under the street lamp shifted, tilting his head again as if reassessing me. Maybe he expected fear. Maybe he expected me to run. But what he saw instead was a woman whose fear had been boiled down into resolve. A car rolled onto the street, black, silent, familiar. It pulled to a stop near the corner, and for a moment, everything froze. Then the headlights snapped on, blazing toward my window. The light hit me full in the face, but I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, letting the brightness reflect in my eyes. Slowly, I stepped closer. I opened the door, walked onto the small porch, and let the cold night wrap around me. The headlights stayed on, unwavering. I held my ground, letting the light wash over me. Then, with my jaw set and my heart steady, I stepped forward. I stayed under those headlights for a long time, long enough for the night wind to sting my skin, but my feet never moved. He watched me through that blinding beam, and I watched him the way I would watch a ghost born from every horror my family had survived. The light carved my shadow across the pavement, and in that moment, I knew if I stepped back into the house, if I locked the door and trembled the way I did on the night I first held that plastic bag of evidence, this story would never end. They would keep coming again and again as long as fear kept the door open. I didn't retreat. I didn't turn away. I let the light hit me so I could feel alive, so I could feel the strength I still had left to guard the people behind that door. The SUV finally cut its headlights. The figure under the street lamp pulled his hands from his pockets, stared at me for one full second, then turned and walked away. They weren't gone, I knew that. They had simply slipped back into the darkness where they always believed they had the advantage. But what they never expected was that I had crossed the line too. I had spent half a lifetime carrying grief and loss, and the kind of fear no mother or grandmother should ever have to bear. Chloe forced me to look into the darkest part of this world, but I get to choose how I walk out of it. I chose not to run. I chose to stand. I chose to fight. Inside, I opened the door to the children's room. Sophia had turned in her sleep, hugging her stuffed animal tight. Leo was curled under his blanket, breathing in soft, steady rhythms. I stood there watching them, feeling the truth settle in my bones. Evil doesn't always arrive with a demon's face. Sometimes it wears a gentle smile in the kitchen, a soft voice at family dinners. But real love isn't always wrapped in armor either. Sometimes it's just an exhausted woman standing alone in the night, shaking but unbroken, guarding two sleeping children with nothing but her will. I tugged Leo's blanket around him and smoothed Sophia's hair. Both were deep in dreams, and for the first time in months, I felt relief wash through me. I whispered almost too quietly to hear, "Grandma's here." Back in the living room, I turned off each light one by one. When the last bulb dimmed, silence filled the apartment like a blanket. For the first time, the darkness didn't scare me. I saw a long road ahead, and every step I would take from now on would be my answer to Chloe's last threat. When I die, someone else will come for you. Maybe she was right. Maybe the shadows aren't done with us. But this time, they will not find a terrified woman. They will find a warrior. Tomorrow, I will take Sophia to her art class, just like she loves. I'll help Leo learn to fall asleep without flinching at every footstep in the hallway. I'll talk to Derek and let him know this family never broke. And I will walk straight toward the light, ready to meet whatever darkness dares to follow. My story does not end in fear. It ends in choice. And I chose to stop running. If anyone ever asks me what message I want to leave behind after everything I've lived through, I would tell them this. They can take your peace, but never your courage. The moment you stand tall, the darkness has no choice but to step back. Before closing the curtains for the night, I looked once more at the empty street. No more headlights, no more shadows under the lamp. But I know they're out there, watching, waiting. I inhaled deeply, placed my hand on the windowsill, and whispered, "I'm here. I'm ready." Then I shut out the night and walked toward my family, where the last light always begins.